Welcome back to the deep dive. You know the drill here. We cut through the noise to give you the essential knowledge, the core insights you really need. But today, we're shifting focus a bit. We're not looking at market trends or the usual external stuff. We're actually turning the lens inward. We're diving deep into something that holds pretty much everyone back at some point. That constant internal opponent. The force that blocks us, blocks organizations, even historical figures, from really hitting their potential. We are talking about ego. And to be clear, not healthy confidence. We mean that corrosive, sort of unhealthy belief in your own importance. Our main source here is a really thorough look at the philosophy and, maybe more importantly, the practical strategies to defend against this inner enemy. We're drawing heavily on the framework from Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy. It's just a fantastic roadmap for seeing how this works.
Exactly. And our mission today isn't just to say, yeah, EO's bad. That's kind of obvious, right? We want to really unpack the mechanics of how it operates. We want to show you exactly how this self-sabotage happens. Not just when things go wrong, but crucially, when you're actually doing well, or even when you're just starting out. That's often missed. And to do that, we're going to use the book's really clear three-part structure: aspire, success, and failure. It's super helpful because it lets us map out specific defenses for the psychological traps at each stage. Think of it like an anatomy lesson. For the enemy inside.
Yeah, I like that. An anatomy lesson. And the core idea, it's almost brutally simple when you lay it out, isn't it? The book basically says ego is the biggest hurdle. It just stands right there between you and real lasting success or fulfillment or even just personal growth. It pushes us into this like zero-sum thinking where we chase status over actual skill. So we have to see it for what it is, an enemy, something to be managed, neutralized, maybe, definitely not something to feed. Okay, so let's unpack this then. Where do we begin? Well, logically at the beginning, right? The aspirational stage. This is when you're starting out, you're the rookie, the apprentice, maybe you're learning a new field, feeling a bit green, trying to find your footing. You'd think this would be the safest stage from ego, but maybe not.
Oh, definitely not. In fact, it sets one of its most insidious traps right here. It's a trap of, let's call it, premature validation seeking. The way ego shows up at this early stage is really corrosive because it fundamentally stops you from learning effectively. Think about it. When you're new, your greatest strength is your ability to absorb, right? To take feedback, learn fast, adapt. But ego, it kills that plasticity because it demands recognition now before you've actually earned it.
Okay. So the conflict is ego wants the applause before the performance is any good. It wants the external validation, the likes, the title, the praise, more than it wants the internal skill development, the actual competence.
Precisely. It's prioritizing, the fancy announcement of your new project or getting that perfect job title on your profile or crafting this great personal brand over the tedious, unsexy day in, day out work that's actually needed to become good at something. Ego wants to skip the apprenticeship. It wants the glory without the grind.
That makes total sense. It's like you're putting on a costume of competence before you've actually built the muscle. And the problem is, if you're constantly focused on keeping up that illusion, you can't risk asking the dumb questions, right? The questions that would reveal you don't know everything yet.
Exactly. You stop asking for help. You stop seeking out critical feedback because it threatens the fragile image. So improvement grinds to a halt. Because real improvement always starts with admitting ignorance, doesn't it?
It has to. So, okay, if that's the trap, what's the way out? What's the remedy the philosophy suggests here?
The remedy is, well, it's radical, honestly, and it can feel a bit uncomfortable at first. It's cultivating what they call a student mindset.
Yeah.
Forever. And that requires genuine humility. Not false modesty, but a really clear-eyed, realistic assessment of where you actually are skill-wise. And, this is key, it requires subordinating your ego to a greater purpose, something outside yourself, something bigger than just getting praise or looking good.
Right, it shifts the entire focus. So the goal becomes the work itself, the quiet effort, the actual output, the measurable progress, not the applause or the static.
Yes, that relentless, maybe even boring, quiet discipline. That's what starves the ego. It's focusing on the process, not the potential prize. The second you start thinking, oh, I'm too good for this task, or this grunt work is beneath me, that's the moment the ego takes over and learning stops.
Okay, so keep your head down and do the work, basically. Focus on getting better, not looking better.
And the sources illustrate this perfectly with a historical contrast. It really highlights this fork in the road during the aspirational phase. You've got two figures whose early paths just couldn't be more different. On the one hand, you have the really cautionary story of Howard Hughes.
Yes. Huge early success, right? Aviation, movie.
Immense, unprecedented success, very young. But his later downfall, the isolation, the paranoia, It's often traced back to this incredible arrogance and, frankly, entitlement that took root really early on. The suggestion is that his initial success was built more on, raw talent and a lot of money, rather than a solid foundation of humility or a deep commitment to mastery over just satisfying his own ego.
And the consequence of that early arrogance, that lack of humility when he was starting out.
It meant that later, when the challenges got really complex, when things got tough, he didn't have the self-awareness or, crucially, the trust in others needed to listen or adapt. He started to believe his own hype, essentially.
He thought he was infallible.
Pretty much. And that belief, born in the aspirational stage, just poisoned his ability to take advice, to see reality clearly, to course correct later on. It metastasized, you could say, into that self-destructive isolation during his success phase.
Wow. Okay, so that's the warning. Who's the counterexample then?
Well, the enduring model for how to handle the aspirational stage has to be Benjamin Franklin. You really can't talk about subordinating ego to purpose without bringing him up.
Right, the ultimate self-improver.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about wanting to be better. Franklin didn't just hope to learn. He engineered a whole system to conquer his own ego, his own vanity.
That's what's so fascinating. He didn't just seek mentors, which he did actively.
Right, but he went further. He committed himself to constant, systematic self-improvement. That famous list of 13 virtues, that wasn't just a nice idea.
It was like a personal ledger, wasn't it? He tracked his progress against things like humility, silence, order, industry.
Meticulously. He wasn't just aspiring to be great in the abstract. He was creating a concrete, measurable process to work on his character flaws, including his own pride.
And crucially, the sources emphasize, he didn't just do this when he was young and unknown. He kept this up his whole life, didn't he? Even when he was world famous.
That's the key takeaway. He maintained that student mindset. He was always looking for ways to improve, always aware of his own shortcomings. His focus wasn't on projecting an image of importance to the world.
It was inward-facing, on improving his actual character and capabilities through tangible daily work. That's the essence of it, isn't it? Subordinating the ego to that defined external purpose of self-improvement and contribution.
Absolutely. It's the fundamental difference between seeking external validation, tell me I'm great, and pursuing internal mastery. How can I actually be better? If you let that ego whisper, hey, you know enough now, act like the boss, right at the start, you stop building the deep foundations, intellectual, emotional, that you need for the long haul.
Franklin showed that being a student isn't just a phase you outgrow, it's a lifelong posture, a commitment. And this is so relevant for anyone listening, right? If you're starting something new, changing careers, entering a complex field, you face this choice every day. Do you choose the quiet, maybe frustrating discipline of really learning, the humility of admitting you don't know? Or do you choose the quick, easy ego boost of trying to look like you already have it all figured out?
And if you're busy polishing your image, trying to seem smart,
Yeah.
you just don't have the time or energy left to do the hard yards required to actually become smart or skilled or whatever it is you're aiming for.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Control the ego when you're aspiring by focusing on learning and purpose over premature recognition. Humility is the watchword.
Right. But now let's say you navigate that. You put in the work, you stay humble, and you actually achieve something significant. You get the success you were aiming for. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. I mean, maybe even more dangerous, because once success arrives, you get the promotion, the company takes off, you get public acclaim, the ego threat doesn't vanish.
It just changes shape.
Yeah.
Becomes more insidious.
Exactly. It morphs. It's no longer the ego of the aspirant wanting praise. It's the ego of the accomplished, and that brings a whole new set of problems. It weaponizes the achievement itself.
How so? The problem isn't a lack of knowledge anymore, presumably. You've proven you can do something right.
True. The problem now becomes the inability to use your knowledge effectively or to keep learning. Because ego constructs what the sources call an isolation chamber. It's like structural blindness sets in.
An isolation chamber. Okay, let's break down that mechanism. How does success build these walls?
Well, when we hit a big goal, achieve something noteworthy, the ego immediately steps in and wants to turn that accomplishment into an identity. It whispers, see, you are a success, or you are a genius, or you are inherently special.
So success stops being something you achieve through effort, maybe some luck, specific actions, and it becomes who you are.
Precisely. It gets attributed solely to your innate brilliance, your special touch. And that belief triggers catastrophic complacency.
Why complacency?
Because if your success proves you're inherently brilliant, then your past approach must have been infallible, right? So why change? Why listen to doubters? Why question yourself?
Ah, so you stop listening to critical feedback because the success seems to validate everything you did, even the mistakes you made along the way.
Exactly. You stop the rigorous learning process that actually got you there in the first place. You start thinking you have the magic formula.
Hmm.
And the most dangerous part, you start believing your own press clippings, your own hype.
You assume you're untouchable or uniquely insightful, and that's when you make the really big mistakes.
That's the pattern. And structurally, this isolation chamber forms because the feedback loops break down. When you become successful, people often change how they interact with you.
How do you mean?
Well, people might stop telling you no. Advisors who used to be blunt might become more careful, sycophantic even. Employees who had dissenting views might bite their tongues, afraid to annoy the genius at the top.
So the ego, actively or passively, pushes away the very people you need most. The skeptics, the realists, the ones who keep you grounded in reality.
Yes, it creates an echo chamber where your own assumptions are just reflected back at you. The more successful you become, potentially, the less accurate information you receive about the real challenges or your own flaws.
Which means, paradoxically, the person at the top can become the worst informed person in the room.
Wow, it happens all the time. The moment you decide you're above criticism, the moment you think, I know best, just listen to me, you've effectively cut off your own oxygen supply, professionally speaking.
Okay, that's a sobering picture. So if success breeds this dangerous isolation, what's the defense? What are the restraints needed to maintain success without falling into this trap?
It requires constant vigilance, almost a kind of productive paranoia maybe. The antidotes are things like ruthless discipline, an aggressive commitment to realism about the world outside your bubble,
Okay.
and genuine active gratitude.
Gratitude, how does that fit in?
Gratitude not just for the outcome, the success, but for the opportunity to do the work. It keeps you humble. It reminds you that success isn't solely your own doing. There's luck, timing, other people involved. It fights entitlement.
And the discipline and realism.
The directive there is simple in concept, but incredibly hard to follow when you're riding high. Stay rigorously focused on the work itself, the daily tasks, the inputs, the process, the problems that still need solving.
Not on the image, not on the perks or the status that comes with success.
Exactly. Don't become obsessed with managing your reputation or playing office politics or enjoying the luxurious trappings of success, because the moment your focus shifts from the quality of the work to the preservation of the successful image, the work inevitably starts to suffer. The truly successful individual, the one who sustains it, has to remain a student of their craft always, not just become a celebrant of their own status.
And we see this in history, right? The sources point to leaders or creators who managed this, people who stayed grounded despite massive fame or power.
Absolutely. Think of leaders who, even at the height of their power, maintained simple habits, deliberately kept their headquarters modest, or constantly sought out dissenting opinions. They actively fought against the bubble.
They seem to understand that the fame and power were byproducts, not the main goal.
Yes, and they understood the danger. They knew that letting success go to their head, letting ego inflate, was the fastest way to lose it all. Their sustained success wasn't an accident. It was directly linked to their ability to resist that isolating effect.
They didn't let the wins change their fundamental character or their work ethic. They saw success, perhaps, as temporary, as something earned daily, not a permanent state.
That's a really profound insight from the work, I think. Ego wants to turn success into a destination. I've arrived, I am now a successful person. But reality is, success is a process. It's fragile, it's continuous.
So ego makes success about who you are instead of what you're doing.
Perfectly put. And that's why the successful person has to, in a way, return daily to the mindset of the novice, that same vigilance, that same focus on the fundamentals, that same humility, because complacency is always lurking.
It suggests that success might actually be a harder test of character than failure, because the positive feedback reinforces all the ego's worst tendencies.
I think that's often true. Failure forces reflection, or it should. Success encourages delusion. The truly great are those who use their accomplishments not as an excuse to relax, but as fuel for even more focused, maybe even more humble effort.
They recognize that the higher you climb, the further there is to fall, perhaps, and the more vigilant you need to be.
Exactly. They use success as a tool for humility, paradoxically, recognizing the responsibility that comes with it and the ever-present danger of ego-driven complacency.
Okay, so we've covered the beginning, the aspirational phase, needing humility and purpose. We've covered the peak, the success phase, needing discipline and realism to fight isolation. Now, what about the inevitable dip? What happens when failure strikes? A setback, a big mistake, a project collapses. This feels like the ultimate test, maybe.
It really is. And ironically, this is where ego, while trying to protect you, often does its most lasting and costly damage.
How does it interfere with dealing with failure?
Well, when something goes wrong, a business fails, you get fired, a launch flops, whatever it is, ego rushes in like a defense lawyer.
Hmm.
But it's a terrible lawyer. Instead of letting you look calmly and objectively at what happened, figure out the lessons, learn from the mistake. Ego completely short-circuits that recovery process.
Why? What's its motivation?
Its motivation is self-preservation. Ego instantly personalizes the failure.
So it's
Yeah.
not just that project failed, it's I am a failure.
Exactly. The sources describe this destructive cycle really well. Failure, which should just be objective data, okay, that approach didn't work, or maybe a signal for a change in direction, or just a lesson learned. Ego transmutes that instantly into toxic humiliation. Because if your whole identity, your self-worth, is tangled up with your achievements, with being the winner, then any failure feels like a fundamental attack on who you are as a person.
It's not just that a decision was wrong, it feels like you are wrong, fundamentally flawed.
Right. And when the feeling is humiliation, what's the natural reaction?
Defensiveness, blaming others, lashing out, or maybe just retreating, hiding, giving up.
Precisely. None of which leads to learning or recovery.
Yeah.
The emotional pain, the perceived blow to your status is just too intense for rational analysis. Ego hijacks the response system.
So if ego is screaming, you're worthless after a failure, how do you fight back? What's the path to actual resilience, the kind that leads to growth?
It requires immense self-control, maybe even more than in the earlier stages. First, obviously, resilience is key, bouncing back. But it can't be blind resilience. It has to be informed by objectivity.
Seeing the event clearly, without the emotional storm the ego whips up. Analyzing the actual data.
Yes. And second, and this is really critical, there has to be an acceptance of responsibility. But, and this is the nuance, accepting responsibility without sliding into self-pity or pointless self-flagellation.
What's the difference there? Responsibility versus self-pity.
Responsibility is practical. It's a clear-eyed accounting. Okay, these specific decisions I made contributed to this outcome. What can I change going forward? It leads to action. Self-pity, on the other hand, is ego indulging itself. It's wallowing in the perceived injustice, the hurt feelings, the damage to your precious self-image. It's passive and keeps you stuck. Take the lesson, the sources say, not the shame.
Take the lesson, not the shame. That's powerful. And it leads directly to what feels like the core skill for recovery, doesn't it? Learning to rigorously detach your identity from the outcome of any single event. We do this all the time, right? We tie our self-worth to our job title, our net worth, our reputation, the success of our last project.
Absolutely. And so when that project tanks or the job disappears, if your identity is fused to it, you feel like you have permanently failed as a human being.
But the philosophy here is saying, no, that failure, it's just input. It's data. It tells you something about your strategy or the market or your preparation. It is absolutely not a final verdict on who you are.
That's the crucial mental shift. The goal has to be to keep moving, keep learning. View the failure simply as information, as feedback for adaptation, not as a brand, not as a permanent stain on your character. Because if you let ego internalize failure as, this is who I am now, a failure, you freeze. You become afraid to try again. Or you double down on defensiveness, blaming everyone else, which means you never actually learned the lesson.
And that's the ultimate danger, isn't it? If ego convinces you that failure means you're fundamentally inadequate, growth just starts, dead in its tracks.
Completely. This failure stage, it demands the most intense, the most practical application of self-awareness. Because it's precisely when we're hurting the most, feeling the most vulnerable, that the ego's reactive, defensive voice is loudest and hardest to resist.
True character, then, isn't forged in how high you fly during success.
No, it's forged in how you handle the crash. How quickly, how objectively, how productively you recover from those inevitable, sometimes catastrophic mistakes.
Okay, this brings up a really important question then. If we've established that ego is the enemy when you're aspiring and when you're succeeding, when you're failing, I mean, it's always there, isn't it? So what are the overarching lessons, the core principles we need to carry with us through all these stages? How do we synthesize this whole defense strategy into like a unified philosophy for living with less ego?
That's the right question. Because the principles are consistent. The first big synthesis point, and maybe the most vital, is getting crystal clear on the difference between genuine confidence and toxic arrogance.
They get confused all the time, don't they?
Because
Especially today.
they absolutely do.
Yeah.
True confidence, as the sources define it, isn't loud. It isn't about comparing yourself to others or seeking validation. It's quiet. It's solid. It comes from the inside. It stems from discipline, from humility, actually. It's the internal knowledge that you're competent, that you can handle the task because you've put in the work, you've done the preparation. It doesn't need to brag or posture.
Whereas arrogance,
Yeah.
that's the opposite. It's loud, it's fragile, it's all external.
Exactly. Arrogance is performance. It's designed to convince other people and often to convince yourself that you're capable, even if the deep work hasn't been done. Arrogance desperately needs applause. It needs to be told it's great.
While confidence just focuses on the task, understanding that the only real validation comes from objective competence, from the quality of the work itself. It's self-mastery versus self-promotion.
Beautifully put. And flowing directly from that commitment to internal mastery to competence over image is that second core lesson, the eternal student mandate.
Back to Benjamin Franklin.
Back to Franklin and others like him. Regardless of your title, your achievements, your age, whether you're the CEO or the brand new intern, the imperative remains the same. Always be learning. Always be a student.
And that's not passive, right? It's an active choice. It's deliberately seeking out new information, challenging your own assumptions, staying open-minded, even when you're supposedly the expert.
It has to be active. The sources strongly imply that sustained success isn't magic. It's largely the result of never stopping that learning process. The world changes constantly. Your past knowledge has a shelf life. The minute you think, I've learned it all, I know everything I need to know, that's the moment ego has won and decline begins. You've basically signed your own obsolescence notice.
Okay, so true confidence from competence, not arrogance. And be a lifelong student. What else?
Another really crucial synthesis point, and this one can feel a bit counterintuitive, especially in our culture that loves enthusiasm, is the emphasis on purpose over passion.
Purpose over passion. They sound similar. What's the distinction the philosophy makes?
It's subtle, but really important for managing ego. Passion, as it's often discussed, can be blinding. It's intense emotion, right? Enthusiasm, excitement. But that intensity can sometimes be fueled by ego, the desire for the spotlight, for the thrill, for recognition. Passion makes the work about how you feel while doing it. And because it's based on feeling, it can flare up fast.
And burn out just as fast, when things get hard or boring or the initial excitement fades.
Exactly. Passion is often fleeting. Purpose, on the other hand, sustains. Purpose is the underlying why. It's the quiet, steady commitment to a long-term goal, something meaningful that goes beyond your current emotional state.
So purpose anchors your effort, not in whether the work feels amazing today, but in the larger meaning or the service or the objective you're trying to achieve.
Precisely. Purpose provides the fuel for resilience, for pushing through the inevitable drudgery, the setbacks, the long periods where the work isn't glamorous or exciting. When passion inevitably dips, purpose is what keeps you showing up.
Day after day. Because the focus is on the mission, not on your feelings about the mission. It keeps the ego quieter because it's not about you.
Right. It directs the energy outward. And that leads us to the final overarching principle, the one that really helps reframe everything. We have to internalize deeply that success, as the world defines it, fame, fortune, status, is temporary. It's fleeting. It's often based on external factors, luck, timing, things largely outside our complete control. Character, however, that's permanent, or at least it's built over time. It is much more durable. And crucially, it is within our control.
Yeah. So we control our response, our discipline, our humility, our learning, but we don't fully control the outcome, the success.
That's the Stoic wisdom running through it. If we shift our primary focus from chasing external validation, that fickle beast called success, back to cultivating internal quality, building resilient, humble, learning character, we build a kind of inner fortress.
We insulate ourselves from the ego's wild swings between arrogance and success and despair and failure.
Exactly. Because our sense of self-worth isn't tied to the external weather, but to the quality of our inner construction. Character, built through consistent effort across all three stages, aspiring, succeeding, failing, is the only scoreboard that ultimately matters.
That really synthesizes it well. The final guiding insight seems to be lasting success, real fulfillment, maybe even peace of mind. It doesn't come from puffing ourselves up with self-importance. It comes from rigorous self-awareness, genuine humility, and that relentless commitment to growth, to being better tomorrow than we were today. The less power we give the ego.
The more freedom we have. Freedom to do excellent work, freedom to learn, freedom to connect authentically with others, freedom to live a more grounded, meaningful life, regardless of what the external scoreboard says at any given moment.
It's about those key shifts then, isn't it, throughout life? Moving from needing recognition to focusing on mastery when you start. Moving from dangerous complacency to persistent discipline when you succeed.
And maybe most importantly, moving from that crippling humiliation to objective, clear-eyed learning when you inevitably fail. It really is a lifelong practice, a kind of inner battle, you could say.
A battle worth fighting, it sounds like. So, for you, our listener, maybe here's something to chew on as we wrap up, especially given the world we live in, right? A world that constantly pushes us to self-promote, celebrate every small win, build a personal brand. If the core problem, as this philosophy suggests, is that unhealthy belief in your own importance, how do you actually practice enough self-awareness day to day to tell the difference? How do you distinguish between that quiet, earned confidence that comes from real preparation and the loud, destructive whisper of ego demanding validation? Especially when everything around you, social media, performance reviews, the whole culture seems geared towards external feedback and comparison. How do you stay grounded when the constant noise is telling you that you need to be, or at least appear,
Yeah.
spectacular?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Maybe think about that next time you reflect on a success or navigate a setback. Where is your focus, inside or out? The battle really is internal.
Indeed it is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the enemy within.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Until next time.